the peace agreement between the United States and Iran. But the contents of the agreement haven't been made public, and Iran has released its own version. So what's the real story? After this agreement was signed, who actually won and who lost? Right now, there's a heated debate online about this. So how should we really look at this situation? So today, the first topic I want to bring to everyone is this. The second one is about Trump. Yesterday, he hosted a UFC event called the Ultimate Fighting Championship at the White House for the first time ever. How should we talk about this? Trump was incredibly busy yesterday. He even had to call Putin. What does that mean? Is the Russia-Ukraine war coming to an end? Today, I've brought you several important highlights. All right, welcome to Listen and Watch Good Morning America, brought to you by Feng Wei. Hello to our YouTube viewers and greetings to the listeners of Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Hello, everyone. All right, let's get straight to the point. After saying it to the whole world 39 times that the U.S.-Iran peace agreement is about to be reached, Trump said it for the 40th time. Everyone was left looking at each other in disbelief. You could say that even Trump's own supporters are finding it a bit hard to believe now. Yesterday, President Trump announced that a peace agreement with Iran had really been reached, and it was even completed through electronic signatures. I already reported this news to everyone last night, but as for the contents of the agreement, the full text hasn't been released yet. In general, it means that Iran will lift its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. will lift its blockade on Iran, and then there will be another 60 days of talks to address the remaining issue, which is Iran's nuclear weapons program. As for how to handle this, Iran's Mehr news agency released the details of the agreement. There are 14 points. These include the U.S. lifting oil and financial sanctions on Iran, and also providing Iran with $12 billion before the negotiations begin. It also includes the U.S. proposing at least a $300 billion U.S.-Iran reconstruction plan, and so on. In short, this news went viral all over the internet last night.
After I looked at it, it was basically the same nonsense version that Iran's so-called semi-official news agency released a few days ago. Just repeated again. This Mehr news agency is also called a semi-official news agency, which is kind of like China's Global Times.
They want to influence public opinion, but don't want to take responsibility, so they set up a tabloid or something similar to release this stuff. That's what this Mehr news agency is for. President Trump harshly criticized it a few days ago, the nonsense version from a few days back. But last night, it seemed like President Trump didn't even feel like criticizing it anymore. So to add to this morning there was another claim saying that the U.S.-Iran agreement has added a new clause about charging service fees for the Strait of Hormuz. It says that the U.S. has agreed, under the framework of Iran and Oman, that passing ships will have to pay a communication fee. Of course, whether this is true or not is another question. It's 100% fake, so why would Mehr news agency do something so blatant? The reason is that it's meant for the Iranian public to see. At least that's my interpretation. What they're trying to say is, look, we've signed the agreement, but Iran has already gotten what it wants. This is the version where Iran comes out on top. This is a classic tactic used by dictatorships, using lies to maintain their rule, right? But at the same time, Iran's Supreme National Security Council issued a statement on Sunday confirming that, after months of negotiations, the United States and Iran have finally finalized a memorandum of understanding to end the war. This means that all military actions on multiple fronts, including Lebanon, will be immediately and permanently halted starting from Sunday night. However, they also stated that negotiations for a comprehensive final agreement will only begin after the other party fulfills its obligations under the framework agreement. So it's basically divided into two steps. First, they will discuss the agreement from yesterday, and then, after another 60 days, they will talk about the nuclear weapons issue. Therefore, this agreement will be officially signed on June 19th. Yesterday was likely just an electronic signing. The official signing will take place at a specific location, for example, Geneva, Switzerland, although the final venue hasn't been decided yet. But in any case, only after the signing will the 60-day period begin, during which discussions will focus on Iran's nuclear program and the broader issue of lifting sanctions. Meanwhile, Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif, acting as the mediator, also issued a statement saying that the United States and Iran have reached a peace agreement. He said, after intensive negotiations, we are pleased to announce that a peace agreement between the United States and Iran has been reached, and the official signing of this agreement will take place. The signing will be held this Friday in Switzerland. On the European side, they also support this announcement. Leaders from France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom said in a joint statement on Sunday that they are prepared to lift related sanctions after Iran takes clear and verifiable steps regarding its nuclear program. This is essentially a step forward, but, well, this is called All right, so here's the situation now. But the International Shipping Association said the U.S. blockade on Iranian ports is still in effect. So ships shouldn't move lightly. They should wait until everything is settled. It's definitely supposed to wait until Friday, but President Trump tweeted this morning that ships have already started moving. Oil-carrying ships are sailing out of the Strait of Hormuz, heading along the southern route, meaning the Oman side. That shipping lane is completely safe, reliable, and clean, as are other navigation areas. So basically, in this situation, who is actually right here? Should ships wait until Friday to set sail, or should they depart now as President Trump suggested? For example, there's an Indian ship, a liquefied petroleum gas carrier under the company Patronaut. This ship, called DIXI, already set sail this morning and successfully passed through the Strait of Hormuz. So this kind of voyage is very symbolic. It basically means there's no need to wait 5 days. You can go now, right now. So to make a long story short, after summing up all these things, it comes down to one sentence. Basically, this agreement, also called an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, has been reached. And the next step? The next step is to spend another 60 days negotiating the next phase. That's why I've always told everyone, if an agreement is reached, it boils down to two things. One is that both sides lift the blockade on each other. The second is to spend another 60 days negotiating the next phase. This is basically just like what Feng Wei said, almost exactly the same. But now, this has already sparked huge controversy. Who actually won, who lost? There are really a lot of different opinions on this. But does this agreement itself have any significance? Does it have any effect? Of course it does. Why? Because first of all, today, international Brent crude oil and American West Texas crude oil prices both dropped sharply by 5%. So the U.S. stock market generally went up, anywhere from 1% to 2%. And if the agreement holds, the price of gasoline and everyday goods in the U.S. will likely drop sharply over time, possibly within a month or two. Where I live, in the Hudson Valley area of New York, the current price of gasoline is $4.50 per gallon. That will soon drop to $2.80. Like I said before, if the average national gas price falls to $2.40 before the midterm elections, then President Trump might be able to break the historical curse and win the midterm elections. So this is the significance that the ceasefire agreement brings to the United States and to Trump. And then thirdly, the national oil prices in the US will drop, and Europe can finally catch a break. That's why European leaders couldn't wait to come out and applaud. Because right now, they're already being suffocated by high oil prices. And it's the same situation in Asia, including China, of course. China is now the biggest oil buyer. So this agreement is also very beneficial for China. So who does it hurt? Russia. Russia will find it even harder to breathe. Why? Because Russia is an oil seller, not a buyer. So falling oil prices don't do it any good. Secondly, its oil production and sales equipment, as well as pipelines, are all being heavily hit by Ukraine. So Russia is really having a hard time right now. As for the Gulf countries, it's a mixed bag, but overall, there's more to be happy about. That's because they can finally export and sell their oil, turning it into money. The downside is that this war has stimulated global oil production, and after the increase, the world won't rely so heavily on the Gulf countries as the central oil hub. After these 3 months, the United States has already become the world's largest exporter of oil and natural gas. Number 1. So, who really won or lost here? I see it on 3 levels. First, the pre-conflict situation. Then, Iran was steadily developing nuclear weapons. And last year, the United States, together with Israel, bombed Iran, right? At the same time, the US imposed economic sanctions aimed at crippling Iran's economy. In other words, it was Iran's nuclear weapons development versus America's economic sanctions. That was the situation before the conflict. So what happened during the war? President Trump launched a strike on February 28th because the Iranian authorities had carried out a large-scale massacre of civilians in early January. This strike led to 40 days of continuous fighting. From February 28th to April 8th, exactly 40 days, Iran's entire navy was destroyed, its air defense system was taken out, and $300 billion worth of Iran's national defense infrastructure was wiped out. In other words, the second thing in this war was the massacre in Iran. Then Trump retaliated, responding with heavy strikes against Iran's military facilities. That was the second round. The second round, Professor. Now, the third round was when Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz. Locking down 20% of the world's oil shipping routes. And the United States? They countered by blockading Iran. So the third stage is Iran's blockade of the Strait and the US blockade of Iran. I think that's accurate, right? So what's in today's agreement? It means Iran will lift the blockade of the Strait, and the US will lift the blockade on Iran. So the third stage basically resets to zero. Both sides take a step back. Now, the second stage is already a done deal, right? Iran has already killed at least 35,000 people for this, and in return, they've paid the price for this massacre, losing 80% of their military facilities. Military facilities worth $300 billion have been destroyed. You could say that the teeth Iran used to threaten the Gulf countries, if you think of Iran as a tiger, those tigers' teeth that threaten the Gulf countries have already been broken. All right, so now we're at the second level, which is basically mutual offsetting. There's killing, plus Iran has suffered heavy blows from the United States. Now, if we go back, let's push back to the first level. Right now, these 60 days of negotiations are about this. Originally, before the war escalated, on one hand, there was the development of nuclear weapons, and on the other hand, there were severe economic sanctions. So the way to resolve this is that one side stops developing nuclear weapons, right? And the other side loosens economic sanctions. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that after more than 3 months of fighting, both sides are back to square one, returning to the original front line. Do you think what I'm saying is right? Of course, you might ask who lost and who won. Iran can certainly claim victory because they can say, the United States, such a big country, came to fight us and we were not defeated or destroyed. That is our victory. They can say that, but the US can also claim victory. So where is America's victory? For 47 years, no US president has dared to directly strike Iran. It has always just been talk. Sanctions. But President Trump told Iran, we won't be polite. Develop nukes or massacre your people and I'll hit you. Blockade the Strait, and I'll counter-blockade. In these 3 months, the US asserted its authority, showing Iran and other dictators how formidable America truly is. So in this sense, the United States has done something that no previous American president dared to do. In this regard, you could also say that America has achieved a victory. But on the other hand, both sides have had their share of failures as well. For example, Iran has lost 80% of its military capability. Under the strikes from the United States, Iran could only defend itself and had no ability to fight back. It was completely unable to pose any threat to the US. It was a totally one-sided situation. So Iran's failure is that it lost 80% of its military capability, while America's failure is that it did not succeed in changing the Iranian regime. The United States also gave up its initial demands at the start of the war to restrict Iran's ballistic missiles and to limit Iran's support for its proxies throughout the Middle East. So in this regard, the US can also be considered to have failed. To put it simply, to sum up, after both sides started fighting, they've been entangled up to now, and now both have loosened their grip on each other's throats and taken 2 steps back. Each side is now minding its own business. That's my current view on this agreement. All right, so some people might ask, there are a lot of debates about this online. How do you see the fact that Iran won't abide by the agreement it signs? Even if another agreement is signed in 60 days, Iran still won't follow it because it's a rogue state. So why would the US sign this agreement? Including the agreement that might be signed after those 60 days, what's the point of that? Of course, as I've already said, this preliminary agreement does have significance, like oil prices dropping immediately. The key is signing that agreement. But what's the use of negotiating another agreement within those 60 days if Iran still won't abide by it? That's definitely a great question. All right, before I answer that, let me first talk about what it means to be able to sign, the key to this agreement that comes after these 60 days and how it can actually be signed. Because traditionally, these negotiations are extremely difficult, as you can see. Both sides want different things. The US says, you give up nuclear weapons, and only then might I consider lifting sanctions. Meanwhile, Iran says you have to lift the sanctions, and you also need to provide me with funds. Only then might I consider giving up nuclear weapons. And even then, their promise to give up nuclear weapons is just verbal. It's very likely they'll agree in words, but still continue in secret. So you could say the gap between the two sides is enormous. That's why, from a traditional perspective, it seems impossible for an agreement to be reached. So why did they manage to reach this agreement yesterday and even agree to continue negotiations for another 60 days? This really comes from a unique idea by President Trump. In other words, he broke down the vastly different demands from both sides. America wants Iran to give up nuclear weapons, Iran wants money and the lifting of sanctions, so Trump split these big goals into smaller pieces. He matched them one by one. If you want $25 billion, I won't give it to you, not a single cent. But if you want $12 billion, or if you want $6 billion, that's fine, I can give it to you, but you only get as much as you do. Before you do anything, I won't give you a single cent. That's why President Trump said when we sign this agreement, the US won't pay a dime up front. The US only pays when the other side has already completed something. You do as much, you get as much. This is called performance-based. If you don't do it, I stop immediately. In other words, it's kind of like dangling a carrot in front of Iran. So by dangling the carrot, you're leading Iran forward. If Iran wants money, wants sanctions lifted, I'll agree to it step by step, but you have to deliver it every step. In the end, if Iran does everything Trump wants, that's what this agreement and the following 60-day agreement are all about. This is the essence of it, President Trump's creative approach, breaking down the huge differences between both sides into small pieces, matching them one by one. I have to say, I don't know what you think, but I really believe this is truly a unique idea from Trump, the master of deals. Okay, but we still haven't answered the earlier question, right? We still haven't answered what will happen next, even if Iran signs this agreement and the one for the next 60 days. Will they just pay lip service and not actually follow through? If they do that, how is the agreement they signed any different from the one during Obama's time? It's the same thing, agreeing not to develop on paper, agreeing verbally, but in reality, their people won't stop. They'll keep developing. So what's my view? I think it's very likely that even if Iran signs the agreement, they'll continue developing. So what's the difference between Trump's agreement and Obama's agreement? In my opinion, the difference is huge. There are three major differences. First, Trump changed the situation in the Middle East because after 3 months of war, or 40 days of war, the Iranian regime, especially its military power, has been seriously weakened. That's significant. In other words, in the future, Iran's threat to Israel will keep getting weaker, including the level of support it can provide to its various proxies around the region. Its bullying of the Gulf countries will also become less and less because its strength has already been greatly diminished. Some people say that Iran might not be able to recover to its pre-war state for 20 years. So that's the first point, but it's not the most important one. The most important are the second and third points. So what are the second and third points? The second point is, if President Trump of the United States signs an agreement with Iran, this would be an agreement to stop developing nuclear weapons in exchange for easing sanctions. If it's discovered again that Iran is developing nuclear weapons, the United States can strike at any time. So the biggest significance of the 12-day war last June and the 40-day war that started at the end of February this year is that they set a precedent, or you could say established a routine, that if Iran develops nuclear weapons, the United States can carry out long-range attacks and bombings. But during the Obama era, the restrictions were limited to inspections by the United Nations Atomic Energy Agency. If Iran refused to let them inspect, there was nothing they could do. Not only was the UN Atomic Energy Agency powerless, but Obama was also powerless. He could only resort to criticism or condemnation, just empty words. So the agreement that was signed simply couldn't be enforced. Okay, so for Trump, if he found Iran acting improperly, he didn't have to just talk. The sword hanging overhead would come down, whether it was America's sword or Israel's sword. That's the key point here. So this agreement is backed by military force, and if force is actually used, whether it's Iran or the rest of the world, no one can say anything about it. That's the second point. The third point is that the valuable lesson the United States learned from this war is Iran's so-called killer move. The so-called killer move of blocking the Strait of Hormuz, America has found a way to deal with it. If you block the whole world, then I'll block you. So what about Iran? Iran will also hold back because it realizes that its killer move isn't actually a killer move. So this experience, both Trump and the presidents who come after him will use it and make it part of America's strategy. So if after 60 days they can negotiate and agree to give up nuclear weapons in exchange for lifting sanctions, then I think at that point the United States still wins. You could say it's still a win for America. Or to put it another way, if Iran violates the agreement, the United States won't just be able to talk, they'll have to take action. Instead, they can take action immediately. You know, if you're trying to develop a nuclear weapon and you keep getting attacked, even after you've built it, you could still get attacked. How are you supposed to keep developing? You could say that the whole development process is never really safe, right? This is exactly what Vice President Vance advocates. He supports targeted strikes. If you find out where the nuclear weapons are, you hit those places. There's no need to launch a full-scale war, so as not to stray from the main goals set by this administration. What does MAGA mean? It stands for Make America Great Again. It's a primary goal to make America strong first and foremost. So at the moment, you could say that with this agreement now signed, digitally signed, with both parties signing, it means the two sides are at a stalemate. But if, after 60 days, the negotiations are concluded, then I think you could consider it a victory for President Trump. Because it's significant. Not only does it greatly weaken Iran's threat to Israel, Europe, and the United States, but also if Iran goes back on its word, the US will strike immediately, without hesitation. So, do you agree with my conclusion? Because this issue is really very complicated. The gains and losses, who wins and who loses, you really have to break it down and analyze it thoroughly to see who actually comes out on top. Alright, so now let's do a poll here, okay? At this point in the negotiations, do you think the United States won, Iran won, or is it a 50-50 split? Okay, let's do a poll, shall we? Alright, next, let's take a look at this. Yesterday was Trump's 80th birthday. It was also the 251st anniversary of the U.S. Army and the 249th birthday of America's national enterprises. So yesterday, Trump held the first ever Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC, on the South Lawn of the White House. Wasn't it a spectacular event? At the opening, the national anthem was played live. It wasn't exactly a carnival, but it was a really grand event. I don't know how many people watched it. Did any of you see it? If you did, feel free to leave a comment and tell us what your impression was. It was held on a stage set up on the Ellipse, that oval-shaped lawn in front of the White House. The stage was called The Claw. The opening national anthem ceremony was really high profile. The band Zen Brown, together with the U.S. Armed Forces Joint Chorus, performed the national anthem. The most stunning visual moment at the scene was when, right at the climax, at the very end of the national anthem, down to the second, the Air Force Thunderbirds F-16 fighter jets and the Navy Blue Angels flew in formation over the White House. The president of the UFC, Dana White, was grinning from ear to ear. Watching the planes, he was like, wow, this is just such a spectacular sight, something that's never happened before in history. President Trump, as commander-in-chief, saluted in military fashion to pay his respects. You know, a lot of American presidents, because they're civilian presidents, regular people, when the national anthem is played or the flag is raised, they salute like this. President Trump never does it that way. He always salutes like this. Why? Because he's a soldier? No, that's not it. President Trump has never been a soldier. But he sees himself as a soldier. President Trump considers himself a soldier. When Trump was in high school, he attended a school in Virginia. No, not Virginia. It was called, the New York Military Academy. The name is New York Military Academy, but actually it's a high school, a military high school. So President Trump has always considered himself a soldier throughout his life, even though he never actually served in the military. You can see this from the situation, so he sees himself as a soldier. When entering a state-owned enterprise, he would salute instead of using his left hand or right hand to support his chest. So that's one of Trump's characteristics. Another very notable thing is that Trump and the UFC boss Dana White, the two of them walked side by side through the Oval Office, the president's office. They walked down the path leading to the South Lawn of the White House. The two of them first exited the Oval Office along the colonnade, then appeared together on the Truman balcony. NBC described this scene as if two presidents were walking side by side. The grandeur and the powerful presence were just incredible. You see, both of them are called president in English. Trump is the president of the United States, and his partner, White, is the president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So they're both called president. The host last night was Joe Rogan, you know, the top guy in the podcast world. So because Dana White, back before the 2024 election, Dana White was... And Joe Rogan has always been the regular host for UFC. So basically, he's Dana White's host, working under him. Before the election, he arranged for Joe Rogan to interview Trump. Now, Joe Rogan is actually kind of center-left, and he has a huge following among young Americans. So his contribution to Trump winning the White House was actually pretty significant. Of course, Dana White is a close buddy of Trump, they're personal friends. So this time, Trump is also supporting the UFC. But it's not just about backing his friend. He genuinely loves the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And then, in the next scene, the fighters walk through the White House toward the octagon. That's what the competition arena is called, the octagon. The main event fighters even pass through the Oval Office on their way to the octagon, because usually fighters enter the arena through the underground passage of the venue. But this time, they actually walked through the White House, so it was truly an incredible honor, giving the UFC the highest distinction. Yesterday, this scene was all about building the UFC's global reputation, and there were a lot of people present. President Trump, Vice President Vance, cabinet members like Secretary Rubio and Secretary Hegseth attended, alongside VIPs and 2,000 active duty military. From the tech world, Oracle's former chairman Larry Ellison was also there. His son is named David Ellison. Not only did his son buy Paramount, but he also just bought Warner Brothers, which basically means he has brought CBS and CNN under his control as well. So then there's also Zuckerberg. Why did Zuckerberg come? Zuckerberg really loves wrestling. He's into combat sports. So this is truly a sport he's especially passionate about. That's why you see Trump, Dana White, Zuckerberg, and Larry Ellison all together. They basically share the same interests and hobbies. So it's true, everyone can see that Larry Ellison is now basically acting as Trump's partner in the public and media spheres, going around acquiring all these key media outlets. Yesterday, a large number of active duty military personnel were gathered around the upper levels of the stands. An Air Force soldier told the media that he felt extremely honored to be there. The soldiers yesterday were also deeply moved, and the applause at the scene was thunderous. The chants of USA, USA kept coming. Now, there was another big highlight yesterday. I think those who follow Ultimate Fighting Championship would appreciate it, but those who don't might not really get it. All 7 matches ended in either a KO or TKO. What does that mean? It means knocking out your opponent, winning cleanly and decisively, creating a perfect finish rate. That's what it means. Now, the most dramatic and bloodiest fight of the night was the main event, the lightweight championship unification bout featuring Justin, what's his name? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. He defeated the former champion, Ilia Topuria, in the 4th round to claim the undisputed championship title. So some media outlets are asking, why does Trump like such bloody things? Because they fought each other so hard that by the end, you could barely recognize the loser's face. Well, first of all, Trump really likes combat sports. He enjoys fighting. That's just his hobby, you know? Like, many like fighting. He believes the strength and competition of the UFC represents that true American spirit. America loves competition. In old World War I movies, when Americans joined the European battlefield, Germans wondered who they were. They never surrendered. Even when losing or disadvantaged, they wouldn't give up. He said that in Europe, when we lose, we surrender right away, but Americans just won't surrender. So it's called having a very resilient will, an extremely strong sense of competition. This is the American spirit. Trump wants to preserve this spirit. Third, why did Trump bring 2,000 active duty soldiers to watch this Ultimate Fighting Championship event in person? He wants to cultivate what's called combat effectiveness and lethality in American soldiers. So the whole event, of course, yesterday, the entire event was filled with, and the strongest atmosphere was patriotism. So throughout the venue, there were repeated waves of chants like USA, USA, rising like tides. Then the judge of the competition, not the referee, but the judge, Joe Rogan, when he picked up the microphone for the first time, this is how he described the atmosphere at the scene. He said this: "The scene was absolutely wild, surreal, and astonishing. The air was filled with energy." But as for the event itself, it was a milestone. For the first time in history, a sporting event was held at the White House. When Trump left the scene, why did he leave? He was heading to the G7 summit in France. He briefly told reporters, "This surpasses history, beyond anything anyone has ever seen in the history of sports." I wonder how many of us have actually watched this. You can leave a comment if you were there in person. Actually, I wanted to watch the UFC event itself yesterday, but there was no broadcast. It's strange. Maybe I just couldn't find it, or maybe it really wasn't available. Anyway, a lot of media outlets didn't broadcast this live combat event, which is a shame. Otherwise, maybe a lot of people would have watched it and become new fans of this kind of fighting competition. Right now, it has over 600 million fans worldwide. Is that a lot? 600 million sounds huge. But the FIFA World Cup has 3.5 billion fans worldwide. That's just a fraction of soccer's fan base. There's still a long way to go.